He's walked farther than you, and he just might be smarter than you, too. Chris Arnade is here. I'm James Poulos. Welcome to Zero Hour. I'm not kidding. He's smarter than me, too. Chris Arnade has a PhD in physics and worked for 20 years as a bond trader on Wall Street. Then he left it all behind. He spends his time traveling to every corner of the world, just about, meeting every type of person on foot, learning about their struggles. And don't we all have our struggles?
Indeed.
Welcome, Chris.
Thank you very much.
How are your feet?
My feet are doing
okay?
well. Irving's doing his best to make them hurt, but
yes. Well, this is Texas, and it's big on community, but it's also big on like super freeway clovers, and makes it a little hard to get around sometimes.
Correct.
Okay, so tell us about the walks. You've been doing this now for how long?
Generally all my life, but as a project,
Yeah.
for 7 years, which is just basically I walk 12 miles a day, 15 miles a day, 20 miles a day. It was generally initially just a way of kind of relieving stress, but then it turned into kind of, I started making targeted walks. I started going to different parts of the world and walking. So
walking is great.
Yeah.
I never regret taking a walk. I'd say that.
For me, it's a way of kind of how I meet people now. And so I just 2 weeks ago got back from 3 weeks in Uganda. And in Kenya, where I walked Nairobi, the capital of Kenya, and then I walked Kampala, the capital of Uganda.
And you've gone from Kampala to Kamala here in the United States. What have you learned about our country and its unique craziness from visiting the far-flung corners of the world?
The entire world admires us.
Still?
Yeah. And, one of the things I hear when people say, like, the rest of the world doesn't like them, they love Americans. The biggest problem you have if you travel around the world is people want to talk to you. They want to tell you how much they love the United States. They want to tell you how much they love Hollywood, Netflix, pop music, and in some senses what we represent. Yet, at the same time, one of the things that's kind of hard to, when I come back to the United States, when I come back to the U.S., hard to kind of bring together is the fact that the places I go are often 100 times poorer. Materially, Uganda, where Kampala is literally, 50% of the country is in extreme poverty.
Yeah, I saw some of the pictures you sent, and just like getting around, just even getting from one side of town to the other.
Vietnam, where I was 2 summers ago, 20 times poor, 30 times poor. But people are happier, especially when you adjust for that difference in wealth. We're a very bitter country.
Yeah.
And when I come back to New York, I always generally come through JFK. It's always shocking to me to come back to a place that is my home and, was my home for all my life. Which has so much, and it's just so angry, so mentally unstable. People are there's just a lot of tension in people. There's a lot of mental illness. There's a lot of dysfunction. There's a lot of loneliness, and you just don't see that to the degree you see it in the rest of the world, to the degree you see it in the United States.
What do you attribute that to? You're talking about parts of the world where, the climate is very challenging, or, there have been genocides recently. I mean, real reasons to kind of feel bitter about your lot in life. And yet you're not seeing the kind of like deep-seated malaise and sort of psychological difficulty that
a lot of it comes down to what I've kind of, what I've ended up focusing my writings on, which is what I call the emptiness of American life, kind of a meaninglessness, a kind of a spiritual void, a kind of metaphysical. People in the United States, we have made it a point to be so emancipated from anything we want to be individuals. That's the whole sole goal of being an American, is that you want to be true to who you are. And so people end up becoming emancipated by it. They see any community that gives them kind of succor, or gives them friendships, gives them meaning, as kind of outdated. So churches, family, nation, even racial identity, all those things are seen as kind of backwards, and you're supposed to emancipate yourself from them. We've all been told, the greatest thing to do as an American is to exercise your right to be true to who you are, to kind of fly your freak flag, to
self-creation.
And it ends up creating communities of one, where people are so free, they have no friends.
Yeah.
Nobody who understands them. And if you do have a community, you're supposed to find kind of the faults with it. That's the churches, that's repressive.
Yeah.
Family, structure is outdated. You're supposed to leave your community because your community is that's provincial, to stay where you are. And the rest of the world doesn't have that. They still have those kind of organic forms of meaning. The ones that have existed for millions of years, literally, that give people a sense of identity and a sense of, being a valued member of something larger than themselves.
So it seems like word has not gotten around to the rest of the world that Americans are in such rough shape spiritually.
The thing is it's kind of, it's one of the things that's in tension in a lot of my writing about this issue, which is, I don't want to romanticize poverty.
Sure, of course.
I will tell you that if a kid in Kampala from the slums, many of them did ask me this, they would ask me, can you get me a visa? I can't get them a visa. But if I could, I would. Because, there's a certain point of material wealth that just makes, living a much more
right
enjoyable experience.
That jump from $1 a day to $100 a day.
That's meaningful.
Yeah.
And, I don't want to romanticize what it means to not have, just the basics of life. But we in the U.S. seem to have said, well, okay, once you have that, you don't need anything else. You don't need to throw out the baby with the bathwater. You can, And so when foreigners look at the United States, they look at the things. They look at functional AC. Policemen who are not, by and large, relatively corrupt. They look at the kind of, they do have a somewhat Hollywood version of the United States, but large homes. Owning 2 or 3 cars. Those are all things that people in general want. But I don't think they recognize with that, at least in the U.S., comes the way we've constructed our culture. Also comes a kind of a loss of meaning. You don't have to have those. I mean, I don't think they have to go hand in hand. I think Europe actually has a healthier balance of recognizing that people need we're humans. Humans need people. We need to be around people. We need to have friends. We need to have a community. And so there's less of a sense of careerism, less of a sense of kind of a meritocracy in Europe that I actually think is healthier.
Well, and you can flip the arrow a little bit and say okay, given the hollowness of American life that you're talking about, how much longer can we sustain all the kind of fancy quality of life stuff that makes such a big impression overseas?
Yeah, I mean, what's depressing about being here is how depressed so many people are. There are very few truly content individuals in the United States. And we have this kind of meritocracy, this educational meritocracy, which says effectively that it's kind of a version of the American dream, which says that if you work hard enough and you study hard enough, you'll be successful. Now, the elites love that one because it justifies their position. But the flip side of that, the corollary of that is if you didn't make it, it's your fault. And what's happened, at least over my lifespan, I'm 60 years old. What's happened over my lifespan is that definition of success has narrowed very much into kind of this very simple path to success, which is through education. And there are a lot of people, and before I did the Walking the World, I spent 12 years, all around the United States, and there are a lot of people in the United States who are immensely gifted, but not necessarily in school.
Yeah,
who have skill sets, and it's like we've taken those skill sets and said, if you're going to become a plumber, or you're going to become a farmer, or you're going to become, a truck driver, or if you're going to become, a nurse, those things just, that's almost settling. That's almost a loss. Like you shouldn't do that. That's, and those things are,
and those are going to disappear anyway. It's going to be, foreigners or robots or whatever. It's not going to be you.
And so, we've kind of narrowed what we consider to be the one avenue to kind of the elite's form of morality, which is educational attainment. And the thing is, I've worked in academics. Those people are not happy either. like the whole system is filled, and they're filled with neuroses. They're filled with mental illnesses, especially in the younger generation, who any failure is you blame on your mental illness. Well, I'm just different.
Yeah,
I'm differently enabled, and therefore you have to understand my, and it's just created a country of people who are just mentally unhappy.
Yeah. So many causes. I just want to pick at a few of them. I've really come to believe that a huge driver of that feeling of hollowness is the way that this education system that you describe, which is so caught up with this kind of managerialism. What are you learning really how to do? Are you learning how to master a particular skill?
You learn how to brown nose.
Yeah, you learn how to just kind of continue to become an ever more abstracted kind of unit of political economy. That system requires people to leave their hometowns, basically.
Yeah.
It requires them to leave and go off to college, and then they do college and they leave probably again, unless they're doing the Harvard thing, and it's a tiny share of people. Right. They leave again, they maybe do grad school somewhere, or they do law school, or they get their first job out of college, and then they probably leave again, and then they might leave another time after that before, okay, finally I'm gonna settle down. And you settle down and you maybe have one kid, and then okay, that was my starter home, and then you need to move again. And just that kind of cumulative impact at a certain point in your life, you feel like you're kind of from nowhere, and in a certain sense you come to feel that you kind of are nowhere.
But when I was doing my work for my book, Dignity, where I went around the world, around the United States, talking to people all across the United States. And one of the hardest things, and look, I came from the educated elite. I got a PhD in physics, right? I'm not pretending to be some working class hero. I'm an egghead. Okay, I worked 20 years as a bond trader, and I would go into. And I came from a small town. I left the small town as soon as I could. As I say, we intellectually stripped mine United States.
Yeah, there are reasons to leave, and one of them is that they took away everything that there is to do.
I would go to these people and I would say, where are you from? And I said, oh, I'd write in my little note, oh, you're from this town. They'll go, no, I'm from 5 miles away. It was very no, I'm not from this town. Place really means a lot to people.
Yeah.
And when I would ask them, why haven't you moved? They'd look at me like I was insane. Why would I move? That concept, so I constructed this notion of what I call the back row and the front row. I think the biggest division in the United States is education. And I kind of came up with these ethnographic types of the back row and the front row. The front row was a striver class, which I am a member of. We sat in the front row because we were the teacher's pets, and we knew how to get ahead, and we wanted to learn. We wanted, and that sense of impermanence, was just central to who we are. And to the point where that's where it came up with the whole concept of just learn how to code, right? You would, if you go into a failing town in West Virginia or Portsmouth, Ohio, or all these places I went, and they would point to the factory that's gone because of NAFTA. And the answer that someone like me would give, well, just move. Mm-hmm. You realize how insulting that is to tell somebody just move? Mm-hmm. That's a source of so much of their meaning.
Yeah.
It's where they came from. You can't just tell somebody to move.
I was in the movie theater not long ago, days ago, and I watched Twisters.
Is it good?
It's really good. It is a classic big American movie. It's kind of all about how the most important thing that we can do is form teams of scientists, which is kind of like esoteric. But the exoteric meaning is that, look, Oklahoma is full of tornadoes. And they might not be as terrible as the ones that are in the movie, of course, but there is Tornado Alley, and there are parts of the country which are just hit over and over and over again with these tornadoes. And I was born outside of Michigan, or outside of Detroit, Michigan. And when I was, 3 or 4 years old, I was watching TV and the screen turned red and you have to run down into the basement and you're looking through the storm windows. And not a good feeling, not a good feeling. And years later, my father was like, oh yeah, that was a little too close for comfort. I'm terrified of these things. The last place I want to be is getting sucked up into one of those things. I would rather take my chances with a 9.0 earthquake any day. Well, partly that's because of our own weirdnesses that we have our different fears. But the larger part of the story is, I am a Californian and I am accustomed to the costs and benefits of being in the place where I came of age. And my instinct watching, real or fictional cinema about tornadoes is, how about you just move? You can leave right now. I'll get $25 to get the U-Haul. You never have to worry about a tornado again. And that's just not the way people think.
No, it's not the way most normies think. And I mean, it doesn't mean that they're hard, fast, but it's central to a lot of people's identity.
People want a home.
Yeah.
And not just within the four walls of their home, and not just, on the internet.
I call myself a cultural essentialist. I think culture matters a lot, and where I get a lot of grief from other intellectuals is, especially on the left, you can't talk about culture on the left. But I effectively say, and it's intentionally provocative, that we're culturally groomed. Where you grow up matters. Yeah. It teaches you essentially your concept of who you are and how you see the world. And the idea that you can just hop around the world like I do, that's my job. That's not normal for most people.
Yeah.
It's forced me to recognize as how unopen-minded I actually am being in a lot of these places where I'm forced to recognize, look, I'm an American. As much as I, just badmouth a lot of our country, I was raised here. I come with a lot of American, cultural baggage. I don't think it's baggage. This is who I am.
Right.
But, and so
that's where your belongings are in your baggage.
And there's nothing wrong with that. And people need to get, we in the intellectual, the front row, the educated elite, are so dismissive of the idea that people might slightly be different. We're all supposed to be the same. Well, no, actually. Ugandans are very different than Kenyans, and they're very different from Vietnamese, and they're very, very different from Americans. And that's something you should be proud of and celebrate. You can't just get up and change places.
Yeah.
You're groomed from a very early age to believe a certain way, and that's where you're comfortable.
Yeah, this culture on the left stuff is really becoming crazy. I mean, I'm old enough to remember that multiculturalism was like what the left did. It's like culture is the most important thing and everyone has their own culture and we have to celebrate and you have to celebrate it even if you don't like it. And things have somehow changed. And what we have now is like, oh yes, culture is important as long as it becomes kind of this like reified identity that isn't actually like rooted to a place and doesn't last for a long time.
Only a few people ought to be proud of their culture, and that's whoever the elites have as their pet minorities currently.
Right.
Like right now, it seems to be Muslims. Like I happen to be, I happen to be very, I quite admire the Muslim faith. I spent a lot of my best trips in Muslim countries, but the weird fetishization that the left has, you know, is it's just they move on. They'll get tired of their pet and move on to the next group that they fetishize.
Yes.
But it's all very offensive.
You have to keep the tumbrel of diversity churning. It's like those margarita machines where, you know, it's always got to be going around or else it gets stale real quick.
I mean, you know, and whereas, you know, what frustrates me is that they also see, you know, the elites see the U.S. as this, you know, this place they actually quite hate. Mm-hmm. Like, again, I think there's a lot of problems in the United States, but, you know, it's a nation that if you live here, you should be proud of being here. Like, you know, you can't hate your own country, not disdain for it.
No good comes of it.
I mean, you know, they look at the country as being filled with, you know, just a racist hellhole. Mm-hmm. When, you know, like, we're one of the least racist countries in the world.
Yeah, by
far.
Well, and, you know, of course, like the right has its own sort of weird problems when it comes to culture. And I think a lot of them have to do with this same sort of issue with education that you're identifying. Like intellectualizing culture just undermines the whole experience of culture. And, you know, God bless them. I got friends on the right. We need to get back to culture, and politics is downstream of culture. And that's why you need to read my new essay about culture. And it's like, man, you know, I understand that a lot of us got sucked into that education system and succeeded up to a certain point. And one day you wake up and you're a mid-career professional and you just can't really do anything except talk about stuff and write about stuff. And you see people's hearts yearning to restore the centrality of that which is cultivated and the life that is possible when you live amidst cultivation of things. And, you know, and they're in this position where they kind of can't do that, but they can write about it and they can quote, you know, their favorite authors about it. And, you know, I've written some books and I've written lots of essays, and, you know, I'm not saying torch them all, but it isn't a substitute, and it's painful to see people trying to work their way back to the real thing.
Right. I mean, you know, I always feel very guilty and embarrassed when I tell people what I do who actually can do things.
Really? Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, you know, I was just in the Twin Peaks last night, you know, like near here. I love Twin Peaks, by the way. But, you know, when people ask what I do, like, I'm a writer, like, you know, I don't lie about what I do. I don't pretend to cosplay as a working class guy. Like, you know, I'm a travel writer, which, you know, is like, when the zombie apocalypse comes, I'm useless.
Well, at least you're doing better than a standing desk, which is as close to walking as most writers get.
You know, so I do feel like I have a lot of admiration for people who actually produce stuff.
Yeah.
Who actually, you know, make things, who actually keep this country running, you know, who feed us, who keep us safe. You know, it's a luxury to be an intellectual, and I wish more intellectuals respected that.
Well, and, you know, I am curious. I mean, you know, physics PhD and 20 plus years trading bonds, like, this is not the classic profile of someone with deep preoccupations concerning, like, the source of spiritual well-being among ordinary people. So, like, what makes you different?
Curiosity. Each of my paths, I was kind of a math prodigy as a kid. And so when you are a math prodigy as a kid, you kind of just do things without really questioning why you're doing them. It all, I mean, you know, like, so I got funneled into doing particle physics because it was easy. I know that sounds absurd.
No, I get it. I mean, that's kind of what the education system is designed to do.
You know, I mean, like,
identify the best talents and just.
I mean, I dedicated my PhD thesis to the abysmal career department at my undergraduate school. Like, I didn't know I could do anything else.
Right.
But also there was a bit of a shy kid who, and I've had to learn. You know, I've learned over the course of my life that I actually really like people. And so it's kind of a shift from numbers to people, and realizing that I learn more and I'm happier at a very selfish level when I'm just immersed with people, you know, as opposed to sitting around, you know, looking at numbers. So the particle physics, again, I know it sounds absurd, but it was a path of least resistance in some ways. It was easy.
Yeah.
And then the pivot to physics, to Wall Street is putting one foot in the real world. Like, I heard that you can make money doing math on Wall Street, and like, okay, I've never made money doing math before.
Right.
And it was fun. It was a challenge, and it was interesting. But after a while, that also got to feel very fake. And I got lucky enough to have made enough money where I didn't necessarily need to worry about always hustling to make money. So I'm like, why? Why hustle to make money? And, I pivoted 180 degrees, and I started spending time with homeless addicts in the Bronx. Because I realized I had only known about that part of the world as something I drove through.
Yeah.
And there was some spiritual moments going on. I was becoming more religious. I was starting to think about the world in a more holistic way instead of just thinking it as numbers on a spreadsheet. Is what most intellectuals do these days. They just look at the world as spreadsheets.
Was there an impetus for you where that kind of religious awakening set in, or did it just kind of grow over time?
It was a slow, I wish I could say I had an aha moment, but it was much more of a slow realization that, the way being an intellectual who is shielded by books, who looks at things through equations, someone's called it spreadsheet brain. Having spreadsheet brain actually, removes you from the evidence for faith. Because there's an immense hubris that comes with being an intellectual. You think we can solve everything. Like, just give me enough CPU, give me enough computer hours, give me enough hours in the library, give me enough assistant graduate students. We'll solve that problem. Eventually, when you go out in the real world, you realize that there are just problems that are intractable. And that we're just kind of you need to accept a humbleness toward how large the world is and how magnificent it is in many ways and how unexplainable it is. And for me, I spent 4 years becoming very close friends with heroin addicts in the Bronx, people who literally lived in Hunts Point, who lived under bridges.
And we're just talking about you just heading down there and hanging out.
Yeah,
and
basically
just
that's what happened.
And striking up conversations.
It happened over that. It took about 6 months to get their confidence, but it was really just basically that.
Yeah.
Just walking around and just being open-minded and just talking to them as people.
Well, and I got to say, like, one of the deep crazinesses here as I'm hearing this story is, for so many Americans, the obstacle to having that experience is not really fear of crime or, fear of a gang of heroin addicts messing with you, or, maybe I'll, succumb to the temptation. It's just the discomfort with walking up to a stranger, introducing yourself, having a conversation, and getting to know someone outside of your immediate bubble.
I had an epiphany, and I can remember exactly where I was. I was on the N train coming back from Wall Street. It was I was 29 years old. It was my first 6 months on Wall Street. And I was always relatively shy. And I never understood the awkwardness of initial interactions. That weird, like, you put your hand out, And I said, I had an aha moment. I said, holy fuck, nobody understands it. So I'm just not going to worry about it.
Yeah.
Like, so now I just barge in.
Yeah.
And, I am kind of, people say I'm most comfortable in a place I shouldn't be. Like, for most of my work in the U.S., I was the sole white guy. I've walked into black churches where I'm the only white person. I've walked into bars in Milwaukee's North Side, the Scorpion Lounge, where I was the only white person. Chuck's bar over in North Side as well. The first minute's a bit awkward, but if you're a decent person and you show that actually you have no fear in a true way, not in a pretend way, and you're just there just because, like, you're curious and you just want to share a drink. I spent most of my nights in Kampala in a bar that was 30 black guys, watching the Euro Cup,
Right.
that had a deep freeze where they had the beer, and there was down the alley was a place you could piss in a hole.
Mm-hmm.
Like the first 5 seconds there was awkward. Like, well, they call white people Muzungo. What's the Muzungo doing here?
Right.
But when they realize I'm there just to drink beer and listen to music and watch the game, it's like, okay, he's
just another bar.
Just another bar.
Yeah.
So that initial interaction can be awkward, but it is awkward for everybody. Get over it.
Do you think our education system is making us antisocial?
Oh, hell yeah. I think, I look at the generation, my kids' generation, like interacting with people is considered like a weird thing to do. Mm-hmm. And it's actually been institutionalized in the sense of if you wanted to do what I did in academics, which is go out and talk to heroin addicts,
mm-hmm.
go into trap houses at 3 a.m, you couldn't get approval for that.
Right.
Because they would say you're going to harm somebody or you're going to harm yourself. So we've made it actually, human interaction is messy. Mm-hmm. You can't formalize it. You can't like put rules on what you just, there's unwritten rules. You just know what you do. Like there are times I leave, right? Like when I realize, okay, like mm-hmm. I've overstepped my boundaries. Mm-hmm. Like you also know, you can't write those down. You just know when this is the wrong place to be.
Yeah.
So we've sheltered kids so much that they don't know how to interact. I see it with my own children. I see it with their friends. There is messiness that comes with human interaction. That's just what it is. And you just accept it. Like, you just move on. You get beyond that because there's a greater good that comes from it.
Yeah.
And so, you just need to, I don't have any, some people have called it brashness, but I just like, it's what humans do, man.
Yes, that's now extreme. Yeah. I mean, I'm even thinking of just like, when you're going through higher education or whatever, if you need help on your studies or on your homework, like that's a humiliation. That's a very bad thing, to have to include someone else in your learning process. You're somehow supposed to be able to exist in this totally self-contained, really like a brain in a vat. And the pervasive competition, you're supposed to be, have some kind of class identity with your fellow strivers, but you all sort of know that you're interchangeable in a certain sense, and the competition ends up turning into, can I be just like this person to my left, but just that much better? That's really unhealthy.
Right. But I think the other thing we've done is we've made so many avenues for harm available. Like when you interact with somebody, okay, that's true in elite space. It's not true in working class spaces. Working class people don't care.
Right.
Whatever.
Yes. Harm is a part of life.
It's like, that person's being a dick or whatever, just like,
Right.
You just write it off. But it's now been institutionalized that person harmed me, a myriad of different ways. Mm-hmm. So the net result is like, if you're somebody who likes people, as I do, like, why? I'm not going to interact with people if they're going to see potential avenues of me being, having insulted them in some way, shape, or form. Mm-hmm. So people have just basically stopped interacting at a very basic human level. And go back to one of the first questions you ask about what have I learned being outside the rest of the world doesn't have that problem. Mm. Like, there used to be like, there's an old phrase from roughly my generation, which is like, you don't have to apologize for what happened in a bar because it's not a cathedral. Like it's a bar. Right. Like, but you let things roll over, you just roll with the punches. And that's sort of the messiness of being able to accept interactions and just being friends and being around other humans is not something the rest of the world is worried about. Like, is it
really just as like night and day, U.S. versus the rest of the world? Have you been anywhere where you sort of see what ails us starting to seep in?
The English-speaking countries, the well-to-do, are following U.S.'s leads of basically bubble wrapping humans, mm-hmm. Emotionally and physically, so that they're scared to deal with other people. And it's primarily a elite thing. Again, the working class in the U.S. doesn't have this problem. Not to the, although it's bubbling down, because I really do think culture trickles down. Mm-hmm. So I've started seeing, when I spend time with what I lovingly call losers,
Yes.
the very, very bottom,
Mm-hmm.
the street addicts.
Mm-hmm.
I'm starting to see harm language bubble down and being used by them. So that everything is an avenue of harm. You've done me an institutional racism, like that never was there 10 years ago.
Right. Seeing yourself as an object and not a subject.
Or as an object that is always very, very a very easily harmed object.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So no, the rest of the world is like, part of the reason I spend so much time outside the U.S. is it's just so nice, in the sense of being around people who remember what it is to be a person.
Mm-hmm.
And so when I'm in the U.S., I try to stay away from elite spaces for the same reason, which is they're so emotionally cold.
Yeah.
They're so stale.
Yeah. Yeah. You can almost feel that like prophylactic
Yes.
thing.
And that's something that's happened over my lifetime. That wasn't the case.
Yeah.
To
Well,
the degree
COVID
it was-
really just took it to
Yeah,
another
but
place.
COVID accelerated the process.
Yeah. But it was there before COVID. It was there before the internet. It's been building for a long time.
Yeah, but COVID basically put it on a fast forward and jumped it a decade ahead.
Yeah. Have you been anywhere where you felt like, I wish I could stay?
I had to. I'm leaving the U.S. for the elections. I don't want to be here in October, November.
Seems like maybe you're going to have a more peaceful fall than the rest of us.
And I've always been running through my head, where could I live?
Right.
And so I had to actually, the answers have been Istanbul, Buenos Aires, Seoul, Korea, Ulaanbaatar, Mongolia.
Right.
But when I actually went to book the trip, like about a month ago, it ended up being Vietnam.
Yeah.
And so there's just a healthy balance of kind of communalism, enough economic growth that, and just people are just so genuine.
Yeah. I've heard good things.
And the other thing is, it's about 12 hours different from the U.S. So like I'll be completely...
You will be totally detached. Yeah.
As detached as I can be from the upcoming madness.
Seoul is an interesting one for me. You probably know this, better than many. The demographics in South Korea are not looking good.
Yeah, so that basically made that was the reason that I find it depressing.
Yeah.
There's no kids.
Right.
And
no, seemingly not a lot of interest.
Nope.
Not a lot of regret.
And it's to fly from, I will fly. My round trip is actually to Seoul because of logistical reasons, but I'll go from Seoul to Vietnam, or probably Laos first. But that is night and day because they're children. And so I remember taking that initial flight and going, wow, they're like, what's different here? Oh, there's a lot of kids. It's very young. And, their Seoul, I like, had a kind of good food, right balance of development, very friendly people, but it starts to become depressing because it's very secular in a way, and it's a very what I call a very thin culture, in the sense of they've raised cute to almost a religious, to the point where it feels very vapid and empty, and it starts grating on you eventually. This sense of like you celebrating cartoon characters almost as religious icons.
Yeah, you look at K-pop and start to think like this is the last generation. Like there aren't that many younger South Koreans than the ones who are up there, that generation that's doing the K-pop.
They do love to drink, though.
Yeah?
They absolutely love to drink in a way that few countries, like one of my things to do when I go to a country is I like to watch the rom-coms, that locally produced rom-coms. And they still have every Korean rom-com has a scene where everybody gets blastedly drunk, and it's played for humor. So it's kind of like the old U.S. concept of the funny drunk.
Right.
So they love drinking.
Yeah. Has there been any place that really just surprised you that kind of has like a bad reputation, or where you think that the people are really misunderstood in the U.S.?
Probably Amman, Jordan.
Interesting.
It's probably one of the most. I think in the U.S. we have a very cartoonish version of Muslim faith.
Yeah.
And there's a reason we have that. We haven't seen the best necessarily. Whereas, I walked all over Amman, and parts where I was told not to go because it was too dangerous. And I was welcomed everywhere, to the point where, and this is the biggest problem I've had as a traveler, is you're overwhelmed with gratitude to the point where it slows your movement. Yeah. Hey, come have a drink with me. Hey, can I give you free food? Hey, come inside. Let me show you my cat. Just like this continual friendliness that can be very embarrassing because people insist on buying you drinks, and you're like,
on drink 10, you're like, oh,
but also
okay.
I literally have probably 1,000 times more than you do.
Yeah.
And you're buying me a drink. It feels very, and so, but Jordan was just, people were so friendly. Welcome, 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 and a true generosity that's very central to what the Muslim faith, the idea that you're supposed to be very welcoming to outsiders.
Well, and that's also a part of the world where in many places, actually, the demographics aren't upside down.
No, they're not upside down.
And, maybe there has to be a little war sometimes for that to happen. Iraq, Afghanistan, lots of kids now.
Yeah. So I think the Jordan has probably been the one that I think where the reputation is probably the most different from the reality.
Yeah. Fascinating. When it comes to the demographics thing, when it comes to the kids, do you think that this country is headed for some kind of population bust?
I mean, I think if it weren't for immigration, perhaps. I do think, a lot of my writing and my future focus is I leave in 2 days on a month-long tour of the U.S., effectively talking to people about the American dream. And the American dream includes having kids. It's this idea that you can, if you have an idea, if you work hard enough, play by the rules, and have a good enough idea, you can build a life for your kids that's better than your own. And I think the only people I really see in the U.S., the only groups that feel that is effectively Mexican Americans, recent Mexican American immigrants, where and a lot of that is that they still have a very strong sense of faith. They still have a strong sense of family, but also what they come from. They're still very happy with what they have because it's so much more than what they came from. But families have been here 3 or 4 generations. I think the American dream is starting to basically tip over and feel exposed and feel empty. And so the most depressing stories I've heard in the U.S. is, I was very early to write about and focus on the opioid epidemic. Basically shooting up drugs is a form of suicide.
Yeah.
It's just a slower form. It's a kind of almost Russian roulette form. But when you think about suicide, that's one of the most damning things you can do as a human being. It's a very human act. Animals don't kill themselves. And it's effectively saying, it's the ultimate, no, I don't want to be part of this. And the people I've heard that talk to who across the United States, I remember one in particular in Battle Creek, Michigan. This was in 2016, 2017 or so, who was maybe 75, older couple. And I forgot what I had asked her, but she basically said she's glad she's not young.
Wow.
And think about that. Say that you're glad you're not young because, she saw her grandchildren what we're not going to have the life she has. That's effectively intellectual suicide. Saying I would love to be 20. I don't know about you, but like,
Sure.
like I don't want to die.
Yeah.
And I think in the United States, that attitude is what causes people not to have kids in some senses.
I think back to one of the other great itinerant journalists, Hunter S. Thompson, who infamously went to Circus to find the American dream. That was sort of the conceit of Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas. He was on assignment for Rolling Stone, trying to figure out if the American dream was dead. And this was, I think, 1972, right? And so the kind of dark comedy of the book is it's not dead. It's in Circus, Las Vegas, Nevada. And it's kind of like become this exaggerated funhouse, insane version of whatever it used to be. There's a lot of nostalgia now in this country, not necessarily for 1972, but some people it's the 90s, some people it's the 80s, some people it's the 50s. Not a lot of it's not just that there's not a lot of quote unquote hope for the future, which bothers a lot of the tech guys I know. Oh, come on, like we got futurism, we need to bring that. Okay, maybe, but what about right now? What about the present? Does anyone have hope for the present? And a lot of that seems to be just so elusive right now. And that's not the kind of the weirdness that Hunter Thompson was trying to figure out when it was the 70s and America was looking like it had been through hell. And is it still? Are we still who we think we are? We're beyond that now. We're somewhere else entirely. And I wonder if you feel like you have a bead on where exactly that is.
I think there has been a shattering of any form of communities. That you go back to the 70s. I was a child then, but there was a shared sense of being American. I still remember when President Carter came on the PA system to say that the failed helicopter attempt to rescue the hostages in Iran.
Right.
Like that's something we all heard about. Like there was you went through a shared experience. I don't think there's a shared experience in the U.S. anymore. Like, we all watch Roots.
Right.
We also, there are these things that we all did as a nation together. And I don't feel very much like the U.S. has a kind of codified whole. There's a shared experience. We're just a bunch of atoms bumping around in this vat who happen, I think the shared ethos. When I'm in Japan, right? Japan is being Japanese is very important to the Japanese. They're preserving that. That's very central to who they are. Being Muslim is very important to the Jordanians. What's very important to the United States? What keeps us together? I've always thought it was the American dream, this kind of idea that it's almost a prosperity gospel that we've raised to this kind of religious level, that it's fully secular, but it's been raised to kind of almost a metaphysical idea. That feels like it's kind of collapsing. If you can't do that, then we have nothing together as a country. We're just like there's no shared direction, and that's bad.
It does. I mean, it is bad. On the other hand, like we're a big country, and it might not always feel like the land of plenty, but it's still pretty big, and there's still a lot of plenty relative to a lot of other places. So what I'm asking is, is there a new center of gravity that people are gonna locate themselves in, do you think, where maybe it's not the whole country, but maybe it's something that would be more familiar to, Americans from 150, 200 years ago, where it's more regional, it's more local? The people have found online communities. They find,
you know, there's still niche groups. I don't know if Americans, you know, I feel that those groups have to be physical groups.
Yeah.
I think the difference, I don't think online friendships are as meaningful. Maybe that's just me being an old guy, but you know, maybe there'll be a revival of kind of like, you know, hobbyists in the U.S. like where you know, where you can find the same people who like to fly Fokker F triplane mini planes, like, and you get together once a year. You know.
Yeah. Well, you know, speaking as someone who has, I guess, a lot of online, you know, colleagues, associates, people I used to live near and don't anymore. I rarely feel like I wish I lived in a small town with all of these people, right? But I often feel like I wish I could see them more. And just having the entire relationship reduced down to, you know, a little video screen this big, which it's usually not a video screen. It's usually just like messages in a group chat. You know, it's not bad exactly, but it's not real.
I mean, you know, I recently wrote a piece that for me went relatively viral, which was saying that Europe has a healthier place because of everything in the U.S. is, what are you going to get out of this? Like, some people just want to exist. Like, you just go to the bar and hang out with your friends, or you just go to the bar to hang out. Not because you have a career goal, not because like it's like you just, and you know, that the kind of third spaces, you know, the places, those are less and less.
Well, and what I've read from you, it's basically McDonald's in the Walmart parking lot, right?
Yeah, and you know, COVID changed a lot of that. You know, I don't necessarily, you know, when I pointed out the McDonald's are community centers in a lot of places, that was not necessarily what that was supposed to show, is that how deeply people want community. They want it so much that they'll form it in a McDonald's. You know, think about the whole point of McDonald's. It was designed to be entirely transactional. And people are like, no, actually, I want to sit here and talk to other people.
Yeah, right. Like, over fast food.
Yes. And that just, to me, my whole kind of point on McDonald's was supposed to be that humans are fundamentally social creatures. And when you take the social out of existence, it becomes a void that gets filled with ugly stuff. Drugs, extreme politics, you know, just ranting. Like, it almost feels like if I say to somebody, like, what'd you do last night? Oh, I just hung out at the Twin Peaks. For what? Just to hang out.
Yeah.
Like, why do I have to explain myself?
Right.
Like, were you writing an article? No, just hanging out. Just talking to people.
Although it's now, you don't need to provide an excuse for why. If you say, oh yeah, I was just on my phone all night.
Yeah.
Just like stayed in bed, just,
you know,
like, scrolling.
One of the long walks I recently did is I walked up the Rhone Valley in France. I walked. I do these long walks. Like, it was like 250-mile walk over 2 weeks. And I'd walk 15 miles, stop in these little small town cafes at night and just sit there and rest. Nobody's on their phone, man. Fewer.
Yeah.
But they were just sitting there existing, you know? You know, there's a friend of mine just sent me this quote by this theologian about leisure, and suggesting that, you know, if you ask an American what's leisure, like, it usually comes with like things that get accomplished. Right. Like, you know, whereas, you know, the leisure should be something where you don't have to explain yourself.
Yeah.
You're just, you know.
Yeah. Well, it's, you know, it's interesting. One of my favorite biblical parables is the parable of the talents, you know, and sort of three guys you get one, and you get five, and you get 10. The Lord of the manor, and he says, you know, I'll be back, so go make some money with the money that I've given you. And the guy who gets one is worried that if he tries to make more money off of his one talent, he might lose the one talent and have nothing. So he buries it in a hole in the ground. And the Lord comes back and says like, okay. And the guy with 10 is like, no, I have 20. And it's like, great. And the guy with 5 says, well, now I have 10. And like, that's also good. And the guy with 1 says, well, I hit it. And here's your one talent back. And the Lord is angry. He's like, you did not understand the assignment, and of course this is a metaphor for spiritual treasure. The Spirit is in you now, and you got to go put it in circulation. And, it's very hard to put the Spirit in circulation when you are isolated, when you are closed in on yourself. And so, you go down to the cafe and you see people kind of just hanging out. Yeah, maybe they're, having the dignified solitary experience of remembering that they're human. But maybe they're also, just in a small but very important way, keeping the Spirit in circulation.
I mean, that's become harder in the U.S., especially post-COVID.
Yeah.
Like we still have the plexiglass systems around. Like it's become very impersonal.
There's still those dots on the sidewalk sometimes. Keep your distance. What a terrible slogan for public health. Keep your distance.
Exactly.
And they made it up 6 feet. Oh yeah, I made that one up. I mean, Fauci is on record as saying this. It's that's a sort of story for another day. But how long is your American Dream tour going to be?
It'll be basically a little over 3 weeks.
Okay. Because I'd love to have you back on and sort of see where people are at.
I did exactly this project literally 9 years ago. And it was during the rise of Trump as a candidate. And so
this is like a decade-long study that would not be permitted to go through as a PhD thesis because of the risk of harm to yourself and others.
You can't. I would have to get all sorts of, what's it called, IRS or EPS or whatever it's called. There's some internal system they have where they basically say if you talk to people, like you're a bad person.
Yeah. Okay. So 9 years ago, you did it.
Yeah.
And you came away from that tour thinking what?
First of all, I thought Trump could win the presidency, which got people laughed at me for because that's all people wanted to talk about. But it was depressing. It's kind of where I formulated my idea of there being a kind of, it changed a lot of how I thought about the world because how the elites were completely and utterly out of touch with their own country.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I can't even it. It's frustrating as a writer because I can't describe how out of touch they are. They don't know their country. They don't like the people in their country. They don't know them. And they're scared of them. And
it's a dangerous combination.
And so, and the problem is, it'd be nice if you could ignore the elites, but you can't ignore them. They run stuff.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
not always very well.
And not very well at all.
Yeah.
And so, their values filter down. And so what I learned then was how deep of a resentment there was in the country towards the educated class, which included me.
Sure.
So that began some soul searching on me of okay, well, maybe I should change how I behave and question what I believe. But it's been a frustrating decade because when I saw this, I thought, well, I'll go back to my old elite friends and say, hey, look what I found. And they'd go, yay.
Right.
Oh, great. We're going to change.
Field work. Right.
Instead, they called me a racist apologist, all sorts of words.
Yeah.
Like, they don't want anything to do with me. Being like, what do you mean? Like, or that the population is deluded. They're racist. They're whatever. Like, they're idiots. They need more education, So it's like, at a personal level, it was very, very intellectually frustrating because, I just wanted to say, just get in a car and go. Go visit Portsmouth, Ohio. Don't go to the nonprofit. Don't go talk to the activist class. Don't go talk to the mayor.
Right. Don't
go talk to the 3 NGOs and, the head of the Republican Party, the head of the Democratic Party. Don't do any of that. Go to the McDonald's, sit there and talk to people. Go into the Walmart. Go into the dive bars. Go into the churches. Just talk to people. And you'll see that you do not understand your country. And a lot of people feel insulted, demeaned, misunderstood. They feel unloved, unappreciated. They feel right, and they correctly understand that the elites see them with disdain. They understand the contempt.
Yeah.
And, so when you go back and tell the elites that, well, give me an example of the contempt they feel. It's like, dude, man, you don't get it.
Yeah. Well, it's damning. It really is. And I think one way or another, a reckoning is coming.
Yeah. I mean, the ability to ignore the problem and to make it go away. I mean, again, elites are elites because they have a lot of power. A lot of ways to deny and hide things.
Yeah. At least for now. Well, I, for one, will be very curious to see how your tour goes this time. And the door's open. So, Chris Arnade, thanks so much.
Thank you for having me.
That's all the time we got this time around. Until next time, thanks to Chris, I'm James Poulos. This is Zero Hour, and may God have mercy on us all.